The blood on her knuckles wasn't hers this time, but Mara Crawford knew the next bruise would be if she didn't run now. She stumbled through the rain-soaked streets of downtown Seattle, her ribs screaming with every breath, her vision blurred by tears and the swelling around her left eye. The designer dress her husband had bought her last week hung torn at the shoulder, a bitter reminder that David's gifts always came with a price. 3 years of marriage had taught her that his apologies meant nothing, that his promises to change were lies wrapped in expensive jewelry and weekend getaways. Tonight had been different, though. Tonight she'd seen something in his eyes that went beyond rage, beyond the usual violence. Tonight she'd seen murder. The neon signs reflected off the wet pavement as she ran, her bare feet slapping against concrete. She'd lost her shoes somewhere between the penthouse and the street, but it didn't matter. Nothing mattered except getting away, finding somewhere he couldn't reach her. The police had been useless before, and David's family connections ran too deep. Restraining orders were just paper to a man who owned half the judges in King County. Mara turned down an alley she didn't recognize, her chest heaving, her body threatening to collapse. The buildings here looked different from the rest of the city. Older somehow, their architecture gothic and imposing despite being wedged between modern glass towers. Gargoyles leered down from stone cornices, and the streetlights seemed dimmer, as if the darkness here had more weight. She nearly collided with the door. It appeared out of nowhere, or perhaps she simply hadn't been looking where she was going. Heavy oak reinforced with iron bands, it looked like something transplanted from a medieval castle. Above it, carved into the stone lintel, were words in a language she didn't recognize. Her hand touched the wood, and she felt something pulse beneath her palm, like a heartbeat. The door swung open. Warmth spilled out into the cold night, and with it came the scent of old books and something she couldn't identify, something that made her think of autumn nights and ancient forests. She should have been afraid. Every instinct should have told her to run. Instead, she stepped inside. The interior defied logic. The narrow alley building had contained a vast entrance hall, all soaring ceilings and marble floors, lit by chandeliers that held real candles. Tapestries hung on the walls depicting battles between creatures she assumed were mythological. At the far end, a grand staircase split into 2 wings, and standing at its base was a man who made her forget how to breathe. He was tall, easily 6.5 feet, with shoulders broad enough to block out the world. His hair fell to his shoulders in waves of pure white, not the white of age but of moonlight given form. His skin held that same alabaster quality, luminous and perfect, without a single flaw she could detect. He wore a black suit that looked hand-tailored, probably centuries ago based on the subtle styling, and when his eyes met hers, she saw they were the color of fresh blood. "Please," she heard herself say, her voice breaking. "Please, I need to hide. My husband, he's going to kill me. I don't have anywhere else to go." The man didn't move for a long moment, those crimson eyes studying her with an intensity that should have terrified her. Then he walked forward, each step deliberate and predatory, until he stood close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. Up close she could see the sharp angles of his face, the aristocratic features that belonged on ancient coins or Renaissance paintings. He was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at, beautiful and utterly inhuman. "Your husband," he said, his voice deep and accented with something old-world European. "Is he the one who did this to you?" One pale hand reached out, his fingers hovering just above the bruises on her face without quite touching. Mara nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have come here. I don't even know where here is. I just needed somewhere, anywhere, and the door was open and I hush." A single word carried such command that she fell silent instantly. "You are in the Court of Thorns, the seat of vampire power in this region. I am Draeven Thornheart, and I am its king." He tilted his head, studying her like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve. "You came here seeking sanctuary from a mortal who would harm you. That is not a request I hear often." "Vampire," Mara whispered, the word catching in her throat. She should run, she should scream. Instead, she stood there meeting those blood-red eyes and said, "Can you help me? Please, I'm begging you. He'll find me anywhere else. He has money, connections, he owns half this city. But this place, he doesn't know about this place, does he?" Draven's expression remained unreadable, but something flickered in his eyes that might have been interest or might have been something darker. "No, no mortal knows of this place unless we will it. The court exists between worlds, hidden by blood magic older than your civilization." He paused, then asked, "Why should I help you, Mara Crawford?" She startled at the use of her name, but of course he would know it. He was a vampire king, and she had a feeling that power like his came with knowledge. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't have anything to offer you. I'm just a woman running out of time and options. But I saw the door and something told me to come inside. And now I'm here and I'm asking because it's all I have left." For another endless moment, Draven simply watched her. Then he turned, walked to the entrance door she'd come through, and with a gesture of his hand she heard locks sliding into place, heavy and final. The sound echoed through the vast hall like a death knell. "Very well," he said, his back still to her. "I will grant you sanctuary within my court. Your husband will not touch you here. No mortal will." He turned to face her again, and this time she saw something almost like a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "But understand this, human. Nothing in my world is free. You have entered a realm of blood and ancient law, and you will abide by our customs while you remain under my protection." "What does that mean?" Mara asked, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. "It means you belong to me now," Draven said simply. "Under vampire law, when a mortal seeks sanctuary from one of our kind, they become the property of whoever grants it. You are mine to protect, mine to provide for, and mine to command. In return, you will be safe from all who would harm you, mortal or otherwise." He moved closer again, and she caught a scent like winter wind and smoke. "Do you accept these terms?" Mara thought of David's fists, of the cold fury in his eyes tonight when she'd finally fought back, when she'd grabbed the heavy bookend and struck him across the temple. She'd run before she could see if she'd killed him, but even if she had, his family would come for her. His father, his brothers, they'd make sure she paid for it whether David lived or died. "Yes," she said, "I accept." Draven's smile widened, revealing teeth that were just slightly too sharp. "Then welcome to the Court of Thorns, Mara Crawford. Come, you need food and rest, and someone should tend to those wounds." He led her through corridors that seemed to shift and change, through rooms filled with treasures from a dozen different eras. They passed other vampires, all of them bearing that same pale beauty, that same predatory grace. Each one stopped to stare at her with varying degrees of curiosity and hunger. Draven's presence beside her kept them at bay, but she felt their eyes following her like wolves watching a wounded deer. Finally, they reached a chamber that took her breath away. It was larger than the entire apartment she'd shared with David, decorated in deep burgundies and blacks, with a four-poster bed that could have slept 5 people. A fire crackled in an enormous fireplace, and through the tall windows she could see not the Seattle skyline but something else entirely, a landscape of twisted trees and perpetual twilight. "The windows show the true realm," Draven explained, seeing her stare. "We exist parallel to your world, connected but separate. You're safe here in ways you cannot yet comprehend." He gestured to a door on the far wall. "There's a bathroom through there. Clean yourself up. I'll send someone with food and medical supplies." "Thank you," Mara said, meaning it despite everything. "I don't understand why you're helping me, but thank you." Draven paused at the door, his hand on the frame. Without looking back, he said, "Perhaps I'm curious. Perhaps I simply dislike men who raise their hands to women, mortal or otherwise. Or perhaps," he glanced over his shoulder, those red eyes gleaming in the firelight, "perhaps I saw something in you when you walked through that door, something that called to me in ways I haven't felt in centuries." Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Mara stood there for a long moment, her mind reeling. Then the adrenaline that had kept her moving finally crashed, and she collapsed onto the plush carpet. Her body shaking with sobs, she cried for the girl she'd been before David, for the dreams she'd abandoned, for the life she'd lost to his control and his violence. She cried until she had nothing left, until the tears ran dry and all that remained was a hollow exhaustion. Eventually, she dragged herself to the bathroom and stopped dead at the sight of it. It was larger than some bedrooms, all black marble and gold fixtures, with a bathtub that could have been a small pool. She caught sight of herself in the mirror and winced. Her left eye was swollen, nearly shut, purple and angry. Her lip was split, and there were finger-shaped bruises around her throat. The dress hung in tatters, revealing more bruises across her ribs and arms. She stripped off the ruined fabric and stepped into the shower, letting water as hot as she could stand wash away the blood and the fear. By the time she emerged, wrapped in a towel that was somehow both impossibly soft and warm, she found that someone had indeed brought food and supplies. A tray sat on a table by the fire, laden with fresh bread, cheese, fruit, and soup that smelled like heaven. Next to it was a first aid kit that looked far more comprehensive than anything she could have bought at a pharmacy. Mara ate mechanically, her body demanding fuel even though her stomach churned. Then she carefully cleaned and bandaged her wounds, her hands shaking as she worked. When she finally crawled into the massive bed, wearing a silk nightgown that had appeared in the bathroom, she expected to lie awake all night, her mind racing with everything that had happened. Instead, she fell asleep the moment her head touched the pillow, and for the first time in 3 years she slept without nightmares. She woke to find Draeven sitting in a chair by the fire, reading a book that looked older than countries. Pale morning light, or what passed for morning here, filtered through the windows, casting everything in shades of silver and shadow. He looked up when she stirred, marking his place with a ribbon before setting the book aside. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice softer than it had been the night before. "Like I was hit by a truck," Mara admitted, sitting up slowly. Her ribs protested the movement and her face throbbed. "But better than I expected, honestly." Draven stood and crossed to the bed, moving with that inhuman grace that marked him as other. He reached out, and this time his fingers did touch her face, cool and gentle as they traced the edge of her bruises. "You'll heal," he said. "Mortals are more resilient than they give themselves credit for." His eyes met hers and she saw genuine anger there. "Tell me about your husband." So she did. The words poured out of her like poison being drawn from a wound. She told him about meeting David at a charity gala, about how charming he'd been, how attentive. She told him about the first time David had hit her, 6 months after the wedding, and how he'd cried and apologized and sworn it would never happen again. She told him about the escalation, the isolation, how David had systematically cut her off from friends and family until he was all she had left. She told him about last night, about the business dinner where she'd smiled and played the perfect wife while wearing concealer over her bruises, about how David had erupted when they got home because she'd talked too long to one of his colleagues. "I finally fought back," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He was choking me, and I knew this was it. He was actually going to kill me this time. So I grabbed this heavy bookend we had and I hit him as hard as I could. He went down and I just ran. I didn't even check if he was breathing. I just ran." Draven's expression had grown progressively darker as she spoke, and now his eyes blazed like coals. "Good," he said, the word sharp as a blade. "You did what you had to do to survive. There is no shame in that, Mara." "What if I killed him?" The question had been haunting her since she fled. "Then he got what he deserved," Draven said without hesitation. "And if he lives, if he comes looking for you, he'll discover what it means to incur the wrath of a vampire king." He stood, towering over her. "You're under my protection now. That means something in my world. It means anyone who harms you answers to me, and I am not known for my mercy." Mara should have been frightened by the violence in his voice, by the promise of retribution. Instead, she felt something else entirely, a warmth spreading through her chest, a sense of safety she hadn't known in years. This creature, this vampire king who could probably kill her with a thought, was offering her something David never had. True protection, with no conditions, no hidden costs. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You said nothing in your world is free, but you haven't asked anything of me." Draven's expression softened slightly. "I told you that you belong to me under our law, and that's true. But I'm not your husband, Mara. I won't hurt you, I won't control you, and I certainly won't raise my hand to you." He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "You intrigue me. In 800 years of existence, I've seen countless mortals, and most of them blur together into a forgettable mass of brief lives and petty concerns. But you walked into my court with blood on your hands and terror in your eyes, and you didn't beg for your life. You begged for a chance to survive, to escape. That takes courage." "I was desperate," Mara said. "Desperation and courage often look the same," Draven replied. "The difference is in what you do with it." He moved toward the door. "Rest today, heal tomorrow. I'll begin teaching you about this world you've stumbled into. If you're to live here, even temporarily, you need to understand our ways." "How long will I need to stay?" Mara asked. Draven paused, his hand on the doorknob. "As long as it takes to ensure you're safe, as long as you wish." "That part is up to you, Mara Crawford. You entered my court freely, and you may leave it the same way when the time is right." Then he was gone, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the slow-burning realization that she might have found something she'd been missing far longer than 3 years. The next few days passed in a strange blur of healing and discovery. Draven was true to his word, spending hours each day teaching her about vampire society. She learned about the different courts that ruled various regions, about the ancient laws that governed their kind, about the blood bonds and power structures that held their world together. She learned that vampires could walk in sunlight, but it weakened them significantly, draining their power and causing immense pain. She learned about blood servants, humans who willingly served vampire households in exchange for protection and certain benefits. She learned that the vampire world existed in layers over the mortal one, hidden by magic so old that even Draven didn't know its origins. More importantly, she learned about Draven himself. He'd been turned in the 13th century, a minor nobleman who'd stumbled onto a vampire coven while fleeing a political purge. They'd given him a choice: die as a human or live forever as one of them. He'd chosen immortality and never looked back. Over the centuries he'd risen through the ranks through a combination of strategic brilliance and sheer power, eventually claiming the title of king and establishing his own court. "Don't you get lonely?" Mara asked one evening as they sat by the fire in what she'd come to think of as her room. "Living so long, watching everyone you care about die?" Draven stared into the flames, his expression distant. "I don't allow myself to care about mortals," he said quietly. "It's easier that way. Vampires, though, were harder to kill. I have companions who've stood beside me for centuries, allies and enemies who span the ages. But yes, there's a loneliness to immortality that never quite fades. You learn to live with it, to find meaning in other things." "What things?" she pressed. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something vulnerable in his eyes for just a moment. Power, purpose, the thrill of navigating political intrigues that span decades, the satisfaction of building something that lasts. And occasionally he reached out and brushed a strand of her dark hair behind her ear. Occasionally, someone walks into your life and reminds you what it feels like to be surprised. Mara's breath caught. Over the past days she'd become acutely aware of Draven in ways that had nothing to do with fear. She noticed the way he moved, all predatory grace and controlled power. She noticed the sound of his voice, the careful way he spoke to her, never talking down despite the vast gulf between their ages and experience. She noticed the way he looked at her sometimes, with an intensity that made her skin flush and her heart race. It was madness. She'd just escaped one dangerous man, and here she was developing feelings for a creature who could drain her dry without breaking a sweat. But Draven had shown her only kindness, only patience. He'd given her space and safety, asked nothing in return, and treated her with more respect than David ever had. "Draven," she said softly, "I think I'm starting to." The door burst open. A vampire she recognized as one of Draven's advisors, a severe woman named Seraphina with silver-white hair bound in a complex braid, swept into the room. "My lord, forgive the intrusion, but we have a situation. A mortal is at the outer gates demanding entry. He claims his wife is here and he wants her back." Mara felt the blood drain from her face. "David." Draven was on his feet instantly, his expression transforming from gentle to absolutely lethal in a heartbeat. "He found us," he said, though it sounded more like he was talking to himself than to them. "That shouldn't be possible. The wards should have kept him away." He turned to Seraphina. "How did he get through?" "He didn't entirely. He's at the threshold, but he can't cross without invitation. He's making quite a scene, though, shouting about police and lawsuits and kidnapping." Seraphina's lip curled in distaste. "Several mortal onlookers have gathered. It's drawing attention we don't need." "I'll handle it," Draven said. He looked at Mara, his expression softening slightly. "Stay here, I mean it, Mara. Don't come down, don't go near the doors. Let me deal with this." "He'll try to manipulate you," Mara warned, her voice shaking despite her best efforts. "He's good at that, at making people believe him, making them think I'm the problem." Draven crossed to her in 2 long strides and cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Mara, listen to me. I have walked this earth for 8 centuries. I have toppled kingdoms and ended bloodlines. I have stared down ancient evils and emerged victorious. Your husband is a mortal man with delusions of power, and he has no sway over me whatsoever." His thumbs brushed across her cheekbones with infinite gentleness. "I will not let him take you. I will not let him hurt you. You have my word, and a vampire king's word is absolute." Then he was gone, Seraphina trailing after him. Mara stood frozen in the center of the room, her heart pounding. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to find the deepest, darkest corner of the castle and bury herself there. But another part of her, a part that was growing stronger by the day, wanted to face David, to stand beside Draven and watch her husband realize that he'd lost his power over her. She compromised by moving to the window, peering out into the strange twilight realm. She couldn't see the gates from here, couldn't see David or Draven or what was happening. The waiting was agony, each second stretching into eternity. It felt like hours, but was probably only minutes before the door opened again. Mara spun around, half expecting to see David somehow forcing his way in, but it was Draven who entered, alone this time. He looked unruffled, his suit still perfectly in place, but there was something in his eyes that spoke of barely contained rage. "What happened?" Mara demanded. "He's gone," Draven said. "I dealt with him." "Dealt with him how?" She stepped closer, searching his face. "Did you kill him?" "No, though I was sorely tempted." Draven moved to the fire, staring into it like he could find answers in the flames. "I could have. It would have been easy, and by our laws I would have been within my rights. He was attempting to reclaim property under my protection, which is a grave insult. But I knew you wouldn't want that, so I merely made it very clear that if he ever came near you again, if he ever so much as spoke your name, I would make him beg for the mercy of death. And he believed you? Mara asked, because she knew David, knew his arrogance, his certainty that he was untouchable. Draeven's smile was sharp and cold. I may have demonstrated a fraction of my power, enough to make him understand what he was dealing with, and I may have informed him that you are under the protection of the Court of Thorns, which means attacking you is tantamount to declaring war on vampire kind. Even a fool like him understands those stakes. Mara felt something crack inside her, some last vestige of fear finally breaking apart. He really can't hurt me anymore, she whispered. No, Draeven agreed. He turned to face her fully. But there's more. He was injured, Mara. That blow you struck opened a significant gash on his temple. He needed medical attention, which means there's a record of it. I had Serafina do some digging while I was handling him. He told the hospital he fell, but the wound pattern doesn't match his story. If you wanted to press charges, if you wanted to go public with what he did to you, you'd have evidence now. I don't want to go back to that world, Mara said immediately. I don't want to spend months or years dragging this through courts, having lawyers tear apart my life, having David's family use their money and influence to paint me as crazy or vindictive. I just want to be free of him. Then you are, Draeven said. He won't be back, I made certain of that. Mara closed the distance between them, moving without conscious thought until she stood directly in front of him. Thank you, she said, for everything, for taking me in, for protecting me, for making me feel safe for the first time in longer than I can remember. Draeven's eyes darkened, his gaze dropping to her lips before rising again. Mara, you should know that my interest in you extends beyond mere sanctuary. I said you intrigued me, but that was an understatement. You've gotten under my skin in ways I didn't think possible anymore. He reached up, his fingers threading through her hair. If you want to leave, if you want to return to the mortal world and rebuild your life, I'll help you do it. I'll make sure you have resources, protection, everything you need. But if you choose to stay, kiss me. Mara interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. Draeven didn't need to be told twice. He pulled her against him and claimed her mouth with a hunger that stole her breath. His lips were cool but not cold, firm and demanding, and when she opened for him, she tasted something dark and sweet like wine. She melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, every nerve ending alive with sensation. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard despite Draeven's lack of need for air, he rested his forehead against hers. Stay, he said, the word somewhere between a command and a plea. Stay with me, Mara. Not as property, not as obligation, but as something more. I know it's madness. I know you just escaped one dangerous situation and I'm hardly safe myself, but I haven't felt this way in centuries and I don't want to let you go. I'm not afraid of you, Mara said, and realized it was true. You're dangerous, you're powerful beyond anything I can comprehend, and you could kill me without trying. But I'm not afraid of you, Draeven. You've shown me what real protection looks like, what it means to be valued rather than controlled. I don't want to leave. I want to stay here with you and see where this goes. The smile that broke across Draeven's face was radiant, transforming his features from merely beautiful to something almost divine. Then stay, he said again, and kissed her once more, slower this time, savoring every moment. The weeks that followed were a revelation. Mara had thought she understood romance, had believed the early days with David had been love. Now she realized she'd never known what real love felt like. Draeven courted her with the patience of someone who had all the time in the world, taking her on moonlit walks through the twisted gardens of the vampire realm, teaching her to dance to music from a dozen different eras, sharing stories from his long life that made her laugh and cry and wonder. He introduced her to the court properly, presenting her not as a refugee or a pet but as someone under his personal protection and affection. The other vampires reacted with varying degrees of surprise and acceptance. Some, like Serafina, seemed genuinely pleased, even going so far as to befriend Mara in her own austere way. Others were clearly suspicious of a mortal holding such sway over their king, but none dared voice their objections openly. Mara learned the rhythms of vampire life, the strange timelessness of a society that measured events in decades rather than days. She learned that while vampires did need blood to survive, most of them had arrangements with willing donors or used blood banks rather than hunting humans. She learned about the complex politics between different courts, about alliances and feuds that had lasted centuries, about the delicate balance that kept the vampire world hidden from mortal eyes, and she learned about herself. Away from David's control, away from the constant fear and second-guessing, she rediscovered the woman she'd been before. She was stronger than she'd thought, smarter, braver. She had opinions and desires that mattered. She could laugh without calculating whether it would set off David's temper. She could exist without walking on eggshells, Draven saw all of it and seemed to delight in every discovery. "You're magnificent," he told her one night as they lay together in her room, her head resting on his chest while he ran his fingers through her hair. "Watching you come back to yourself, watching you bloom into who you were meant to be, it's a privilege I never expected." "I was so broken when I came here," Mara said quietly. "I didn't think I could ever feel whole again." "You were never broken," Draven corrected gently. "You were wounded, yes, but that's different. Wounds heal, Mara, especially when given the right environment. You did the hardest part yourself by having the courage to run, to seek help, to survive." Mara tilted her head to look up at him, struck by the emotion in his voice. "I love you," she said, the words spilling out before she could second-guess them. "I know it's fast, I know we're from completely different worlds, but I love you, Draven. You make me feel safe and seen and valued, and I don't want to imagine my life without you in it anymore." Draven's eyes blazed crimson, and he rolled them over so he was looking down at her, his white hair falling around them like a curtain. "I love you too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have loved you since the moment you walked into my court looking like a warrior despite your wounds. I have loved you every day since, watching you heal and grow and shine. And I will love you for however long you'll have me, be that years or decades or forever," Mara interrupted. "I want forever if that's possible." Draven went very still. "Mara, are you saying what I think you're saying?" She nodded, her heart racing. "Turn me. Make me like you. I don't want to grow old and die while you stay the same. I don't want decades when we could have centuries. I want to stand beside you as an equal, not as a mortal under your protection. I want forever with you, Draven. The transformation is agonizing," Draven warned, though she could see the hope and hunger in his eyes. "It will hurt more than anything you've ever experienced, and there's always a risk of death. And once it's done, there's no going back. You'll never see sunlight without pain again. You'll need blood to survive. You'll watch the mortal world change around you while you remain frozen in time." "I know," Mara said. "I've been thinking about this for weeks, weighing the costs against the benefits. And I'm sure, Draven, I want this. I want you. I want this life. I want to be part of your world fully and completely." Draven kissed her then with a desperate intensity, and she felt his fangs graze her lower lip. "When?" he asked against her mouth. "Tonight," Mara said. "Why wait?" So he prepared her, explaining exactly what would happen, making sure she understood every step of the process. She would need to drink his blood first, enough to begin the change at a cellular level. Then he would drain her nearly to the point of death, and the vampire blood already in her system would take over, rewriting her humanity into something new. She would sleep for 3 days while the transformation completed, and when she woke, she would be vampire. "Are you ready?" Draven asked as they stood in his private chambers, a room even more opulent than hers, all black marble and dark woods and priceless artifacts from throughout history. "I'm ready," Mara confirmed. He bit into his own rings and she watched in fascination as blood welled up, darker than human blood, almost black in the candlelight. He held it out to her. "Drink," he said. Mara brought his wrist to her lips and drank. The taste exploded across her tongue, nothing like she'd expected. It was sweet and rich and complex, like the finest wine mixed with something indefinable, something that sang of power and eternity. She felt it burn down her throat and spread through her body like liquid fire, setting every nerve alight. When Draven gently pulled his wrist away, she swayed on her feet, dizzy with sensation. He caught her, lifting her easily in his arms and carrying her to the massive bed. "The next part will hurt," he reminded her, "but I'll be as quick as I can." "I trust you," Mara said. Draven lowered his mouth to her throat, and she felt the sharp sting as his fangs pierced her skin. Then there was only sensation, a pulling feeling that was almost erotic in its intensity. She felt her life flowing out of her, felt herself growing weaker and lighter, like she was floating above her own body. The room began to fade, darkness creeping in from the edges of her vision. Just when she thought she would slip away entirely, Draven pulled back. She tried to focus on his face but couldn't quite manage it. "Sleep now, my love," she heard him say from very far away. "When you wake, we'll have eternity together." Then the darkness claimed her completely. She woke to a world transformed. Every sense was sharper, clearer, more intense than she'd thought possible. She could hear the heartbeats of people in distant rooms, could smell the individual components of the candles burning nearby, could see in perfect detail despite the room being lit only by firelight. And she felt strong, powerful in a way that had nothing to do with muscles or physical capability and everything to do with the supernatural energy thrumming through her veins. Draven was beside her instantly, his face a mixture of relief and joy. "How do you feel?" he asked. Mara sat up slowly, marveling at the way her body moved, all fluid grace and perfect balance. I feel incredible, she said, then paused because her voice sounded different too, richer somehow. Is this real? Did it work? Look, Draeven said, gesturing to a full-length mirror across the room. Mara stood and walked to it, each step feeling like she was learning to move all over again. The woman in the mirror was her but also not her. Her skin had taken on that same alabaster quality as Draeven's, luminous and perfect. Her dark hair seemed to shine with its own inner light, and her eyes had transformed from ordinary brown to a striking violet, rare even among vampires, according to what Draeven had taught her. You're beautiful, Draeven said from behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder so they both reflected in the mirror. You were beautiful before, but now you're absolutely stunning. We match, Mara said, taking in their reflection together, both pale and perfect and inhuman. We look like we belong together. We do belong together, Draeven agreed. You are my queen now, Mara, in all the ways that matter. The court will need to formally recognize it, but that's just ceremony. You are mine and I am yours, bound by blood and love and choice. Mara turned in his arms, rising on her toes to kiss him. It was different now, without the disparity between them, without her human fragility. She could match his strength, could feel the powers singing between them like a living thing. When they broke apart, she was laughing, pure joy bubbling up inside her. I want to see everything, she said. I want to explore this new world with new eyes. I want to learn what I can do, who I can become. I want to stand beside you as we navigate whatever comes next. Then we will, Draeven promised. But first you need to feed. The hunger will be overwhelming at first, and we need to make sure you learn control. He was right. Now that he'd mentioned it, she could feel the hunger coiling in her belly, a need deeper and more primal than anything she'd experienced as a human. Draeven had arranged for several willing donors, humans who served the court and understood what would be asked of them. Learning to feed without killing was harder than Mara had anticipated. The hunger demanded that she drain them dry, that she take until there was nothing left. But Draeven was patient, talking her through it, showing her how to take just enough to sate the need without causing harm. By the third donor, she was getting the hang of it, and by the fifth, she felt confident in her control. You're a natural, Draeven said with obvious pride. Some new vampires take weeks to learn that level of restraint. Over the following months, Mara discovered the full extent of her new abilities. She was faster than she'd ever imagined possible, strong enough to bend steel bars, and she could move with absolute silence when she chose. She learned to use vampire magic, the ancient blood sorcery that powered their wards and illusions. She learned combat from Draeven and Seraphina, discovering a fierce joy in physical challenges that would have destroyed her human body. But more than the powers, she loved the life itself. She loved walking through the Twilight Realm hand in hand with Draeven, loved attending court functions where she was introduced as his queen, loved the quiet moments between the excitement where they would simply talk and laugh and enjoy each other's company. The mortal world moved on without her. She learned through the court's information network that David had indeed survived her blow, and that he'd moved on to another woman within months of Mara's disappearance. She felt pity for whoever that poor woman was, but she also knew that David would never cross the vampire world again. Draeven had made certain of that, and word had spread through the supernatural community. David Crawford was marked, and any vampire who encountered him would know to keep him far from the Court of Thorns and its queen. Mara's human life was declared a cold case after a year of her being missing. Her family held a memorial service that she watched from the shadows, cloaked in vampire magic that kept her hidden. She saw her mother weeping, saw her sister looking lost and angry, and she wished she could tell them she was alive and happy and free. But she knew that was impossible. The mortal world was lost to her now, and she'd made her peace with that. Instead, she focused on building her new life. She threw herself into learning court politics, discovering she had a natural talent for diplomacy and strategy. She mediated disputes between vampires who'd been feuding for decades, helped establish new protocols for dealing with the mortal world, and worked alongside Draeven to strengthen the Court of Thorns' position among the various vampire factions. They faced challenges, of course. There were vampires who resented a newly turned queen, who thought Mara too inexperienced to hold such a position. There were threats from rival courts who saw Draeven's obvious affection for Mara as a potential weakness. There were moments of danger that reminded them both that immortality didn't mean invincibility, but they faced it all together, and with each challenge overcome, their bond grew stronger. Mara learned what it meant to be partners in the truest sense, to have someone who respected her opinions and valued her input, who saw her as an equal despite the vast difference in their ages and experience. 5 years after her transformation, Draeven proposed making their union official in the eyes of the vampire world. It would be a grand ceremony, he explained, with representatives from courts across the globe, an event that would cement Mara's position and formalize what everyone already knew, that she was his queen in deed and name. The ceremony was held in the great hall where Mara had first laid eyes on Draeven, now decorated with thousands of candles and blood-red roses. She wore a gown that looked like it was woven from shadows and moonlight, her violet eyes bright against her pale skin. Draeven stood waiting for her at the altar in a formal suit that made him look like the aristocrat he'd once been, his white hair bound back with a silver circlet. The ancient vampire who officiated the ceremony spoke words in a language older than recorded history, binding them together with blood magic that would last as long as they both existed. When it was done, when they'd sealed the bond with a kiss and with blood shared between them, the assembled court erupted in celebration. The party lasted for 3 days, as was traditional for vampire nobility. Courts from around the world sent representatives and gifts, acknowledging the union and the power it represented. Mara danced until her feet would have ached if she were still human, laughed until she could barely speak, and felt more joy than she'd ever thought possible. On the third night, as the final guests departed and the servants began cleaning up the celebration's remains, Draeven swept her into his arms and carried her to their shared chambers. They'd been living together for years, but somehow this felt different, more official, more permanent. "How does it feel to be officially a vampire queen?" Draeven asked as he set her down gently on their bed. "Surreal," Mara admitted. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life, that I'm here with you, that I have this power and this position, that I get to spend eternity doing this." Draeven joined her on the bed, pulling her close. "Do you ever regret it? Leaving your human life behind, giving up sunlight and mortality?" "Never," Mara said without hesitation. "That life was killing me slowly, in ways that had nothing to do with David. I was suffocating under expectations and limitations and fear. Here I'm free, I'm powerful, I'm loved for who I am, not who someone wants me to be. How could I regret that?" "I'm glad," Draeven said softly, "because I cannot imagine my existence without you anymore. You've brought light into a life I thought had grown cold, reminded me what it means to feel deeply, to love fully. You are the best thing that has happened to me in 8 centuries, Mara Crawford Thornheart." Mara smiled at the use of her new name, the hyphenated surname that marked her as both herself and part of something larger. "And you saved me in every way a person can be saved. You gave me sanctuary when I needed it most, protected me when I couldn't protect myself, and loved me when I thought I was unlovable. You showed me what real love looks like, and I will spend eternity showing you the same." They kissed then, deep and slow and full of promise. Outside their windows, the twilight realm stretched into infinity, a kingdom they would rule together for as long as time had meaning. And in that moment, Mara knew that she'd made exactly the right choice that rainy night when she'd stumbled through an impossible door and begged a vampire king for sanctuary. She'd been running from death and found eternal life. She'd been fleeing violence and discovered true protection. She'd been desperately seeking escape and instead found a home, a purpose, and a love that would outlast civilizations. The years flowed into decades, and Mara grew into her role as vampire queen with grace and power. She became known throughout the supernatural world not just as Draeven's consort, but as a formidable force in her own right. Her court was fair but firm, her justice swift, and her mercy carefully measured. Under their combined rule, the Court of Thorns flourished, becoming one of the most influential vampire factions in the modern world. Together they navigated the changing landscape of the 21st century, adapting ancient traditions to contemporary realities, while maintaining the core of what made vampire society function. They established new protocols for interacting with the mortal world, as technology made hiding increasingly difficult. They brokered peace between courts that had been at war for generations. They protected their people and expanded their influence, always as partners, always as equals. But beyond the politics and the power, beyond the grand gestures and the strategic maneuvering, what mattered most to Mara were the small moments. The quiet evenings spent reading together in the library, the passionate debates about philosophy and art and the nature of existence, the laughter shared over some absurdity witnessed in the mortal world, the way Draeven still looked at her like she was the most precious thing in existence, even after decades together. There were still challenges, of course. Immortality brought its own complications. They watched the mortal world change in ways both beautiful and terrible, saw governments rise and fall, witnessed technological revolutions that would have seemed like magic to earlier eras. They faced threats from rival courts, from rogue vampires who rejected their authority, from occasional hunters who stumbled onto the truth of the supernatural world. But every challenge was just another obstacle to overcome together. Every threat was met with combined strength, and every victory was sweeter because it was shared. 50 years after that rainy night in Seattle, Mara stood at the windows of their private chambers, looking out over the twilight realm that had become her home. She heard Draeven approach, felt his arms wrap around her from behind, and leaned back into his embrace with perfect comfort. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his breath cool against her ear. "About how far I've come," Mara said. "About the woman I was when I first stumbled through that door, broken and terrified and just trying to survive one more day. About how that woman couldn't have imagined becoming this." She gestured at the realm before them, at the court they'd built together, at the life they'd created. "That woman was already this," Draeven corrected gently. "She just needed the right circumstances to bloom. All I did was provide the soil and the shelter. You did the growing yourself." Mara turned in his arms, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. His skin was still cool under her touch, his eyes still that brilliant blood red, his features still impossibly beautiful. He hadn't changed at all in the 5 decades they'd been together, and neither had she. They existed outside time now, eternal and unchanging. "I love you," she said, the words as true now as they'd been the first time she'd spoken them. "I will love you for as long as we both exist, through whatever comes, through all the centuries ahead of us. You are my sanctuary, my strength, my everything." "And you are mine," Draeven replied, lowering his forehead to rest against hers. "My queen, my love, my reason for existing. I would weather any storm, face any enemy, endure any hardship, as long as you were beside me." They kissed then, a kiss that held 50 years of history and the promise of infinite tomorrows. When they finally pulled apart, Mara was smiling, that radiant expression that Draeven had once told her could light up the darkest corners of his immortal soul. "Come on," she said, taking his hand and pulling him toward the door. "Serafina mentioned that the Eastern Court sent a delegation we need to meet. Something about a territorial dispute that requires our mediation." Draeven laughed, allowing himself to be pulled along. "Ever the dutiful queen. What happened to the woman who wanted to spend the evening in bed?" "She'll make an appearance later," Mara promised with a wicked grin. "But first we have a court to run and a world to manage. That's the price of immortality and power, remember? Endless responsibility." "A price I'm happy to pay," Draeven said, pulling her close for one more quick kiss before they had to face the duties of their position, especially when it means spending eternity at your side. They walked together through the corridors of their castle, king and queen, partners and lovers, 2 souls who'd found each other against impossible odds and built something lasting from the ashes of Mara's former life. Behind them, the doors to their private sanctuary closed softly, but they would return there later, as they always did, to the quiet peace they'd created in a life filled with supernatural politics and ancient power struggles. Mara had run from death and violence and found something she never expected. A love that transcended the boundaries between mortal and immortal, a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection, and a future that stretched out before her in an endless tapestry of possibilities. She'd begged a vampire king to hide her from her husband's fists, and he'd locked the door behind her, sealing her into a new world and a new existence. It was the best thing that had ever happened to her, and every day of her immortal life, she was grateful for that moment of desperate courage that had led her to Draeven's door. She'd been looking for escape and found her destiny instead, and she wouldn't change a single moment of it. As they entered the great hall where the Eastern delegation waited, Draeven squeezed her hand once, a private gesture of affection and solidarity. Mara squeezed back, then released him and stepped forward into her role as queen, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together they were unstoppable. Together they were eternal, and together they would continue writing their story across the centuries, a tale of love and power and redemption that would endure as long as the stars themselves. The door had closed behind her that rainy night, sealing her away from her old life. But it had opened onto something infinitely better, and Mara Crawford Thornheart, vampire queen and eternal partner to Draeven Thornheart, had never once looked back with regret. She was home, she was safe, she was loved, and she had forever to enjoy all 3, wrapped in the arms of the vampire king who'd saved her and claimed her heart in equal measure. Their story could have ended a dozen different ways. She could have died that night at David's hands. She could have found the wrong door, stumbled into a different court, been turned away, or worse. She could have rejected Draeven's offer of sanctuary, chosen to face the mortal world alone. She could have refused transformation, lived out a mortal life under vampire protection, and grown old while Draeven remained unchanged. But none of those things had happened. Instead, she'd made the choices that led her here, to this moment, to this life, to this love, and every single one of those choices had been worth it. As the delegation began presenting their case, as Mara and Draeven listened with the patience of immortals and the wisdom of experience, she felt a profound sense of contentment settle over her. This was where she belonged. This was who she was meant to be. And this was the love she'd been searching for without even knowing it. A love that would last not just a lifetime but for all of eternity. The Vampire King had locked the door behind her, yes. But in doing so he'd also unlocked her future, freed her from a prison she'd been trapped in, and given her the keys to a kingdom beyond her wildest dreams. And that, Mara thought as she caught Draeven's eye and saw the love and pride reflected there, was the greatest gift anyone had ever given her. Not just safety, not just sanctuary, but the chance to become who she was always meant to be, surrounded by love that would never fade and power that would never diminish. The door was locked, yes, but she'd never wanted to open it again anyway. Everything she needed, everything she wanted, everything she loved was right here, on this side of that threshold, in this impossible world she'd made her own. And she would spend eternity being grateful for the night she'd run through the rain and begged a Vampire King for help, for the moment he'd looked at her with those blood-red eyes and decided she was worth saving, worth protecting, worth loving. Together they would write the rest of their story, chapter by chapter, century by century, bound by blood and love and the unbreakable vows they'd made to each other. And it would be magnificent.